Ethan had always been a wanderer, though he never called it that. To him, life had simply pulled him from one place to another, each town leaving its marks on him like faint scratches on old wood. He was a young man in his mid-20s, with eyes that carried both curiosity and a quiet sadness. The kind of sadness that comes from knowing life has thrown its hardest blows early on, yet refusing to let it break you entirely. After months of drifting through small towns and dusty trails, he found himself in a remote part of the Southwest, where the sun beat down relentlessly and the wind carried the smell of dry earth and sage. The town was small, barely more than a cluster of weathered buildings surrounded by vast stretches of desert. People moved slowly along the streets, their faces etched by the sun, their lives intertwined with the harsh landscape. Ethan had heard whispers about towns like this, places where strangers were watched with suspicion, where outsiders didn't often linger, and where survival depended on knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet. He didn't mind. For him, being unnoticed was a blessing. He liked the freedom of passing through without leaving a trail, of observing life without becoming a part of its complexities too soon. That afternoon, Ethan decided to explore beyond the town. He had always felt a strange pull toward the open land, as if the desert held answers he hadn't yet discovered. The earth was cracked and dry, each step sending small clouds of dust spiraling around his boots. Heat shimmered in waves above the ground, making the distant mountains look like they were floating. Ethan walked carefully, keeping his senses alert, because even though the place seemed empty, he knew the desert could hide dangers in plain sight. Then he saw him. At first, it was just a shadow among the rocks, a dark figure lying still under the harsh sun. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He froze, unsure whether to approach. The figure did not move. As he got closer, he realized it was a man, an Apache, judging by his features and the remnants of traditional clothing, partially covered in dirt and blood. He appeared unconscious, his body twisted awkwardly as if it had been thrown to the ground. Ethan crouched a few feet away, observing him, the wind carrying the faint scent of sweat and earth. Ethan's first thought was caution. Stories of conflicts between settlers and native tribes were not just stories. They were warnings, memories etched into the land itself. Yet, there was something about the man before him that stirred a deeper instinct, one that overrode fear. He could not leave him there. Something inside Ethan whispered that this stranger needed him, and maybe he needed this stranger too, though he did not understand how. Carefully, he approached. The man groaned faintly, a sound that was almost lost in the desert wind. Ethan knelt down and gently touched his shoulder. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked softly, almost afraid to break the fragile silence. The man flinched but did not speak. Blood had dried on his clothes and his skin was scraped and blistered from sun and dust. Ethan took a deep breath, telling himself that fear was normal, but hesitation now could mean life or death. He looked around. There was no one in sight. No help would come. Ethan realized he had to make a choice. He could leave and return to the safety of the town, pretending he hadn't seen anything, or he could act, risking both judgment and danger. Compassion, Ethan thought, is sometimes the only guide you have. He decided he could not walk away. Lifting the man was harder than he expected. He was not small, and his injuries made it impossible for him to stand. Ethan felt the strain in his arms but ignored it, focusing instead on the rhythm of each step as he carried him toward the town. He could feel the man's body tense in fear, and though he did not understand the language, Ethan sensed his confusion, perhaps even suspicion. By the time they reached the edge of town, Ethan's arms were burning with fatigue, and his skin glistened with sweat. He scanned the streets. People had begun to notice. A few stared openly, whispering to each other. He could hear snippets of their words, questions, warnings, and judgment. But Ethan did not stop. He found a small, abandoned cabin he had passed earlier and gently placed the man inside. He pulled a clean cloth from his bag and began to carefully tend to the wounds, wiping away blood and applying a makeshift bandage. The stranger's eyes fluttered open. They were dark and deep, carrying a mixture of fear, pain, and something Ethan could not name. The man looked at him warily, and Ethan understood immediately. Trust had to be earned. He spoke softly, almost like a prayer. "You're safe here. I won't hurt you." He had no idea if the man understood English, but tone mattered more than words now. Hours passed. Ethan fetched water, cleaned wounds, and offered small pieces of food. The stranger took them hesitantly at first, then with more confidence as he realized Ethan meant no harm. Night fell, and the desert transformed under the moonlight. Shadows stretched across the cabin floor, and the wind whispered through cracks in the walls. Ethan stayed close, sitting by the fire he managed to light, watching over the man. He could feel a silent tension between them, a delicate thread of connection forming without a single word spoken. During the night, Ethan learned a little more about the stranger. Through gestures and a few broken words, he discovered the man's name, Kaya. Kaya had been traveling alone when he was attacked by bandits and left injured and alone in the desert. Ethan listened carefully, nodding, giving him space but showing through actions that he was not alone anymore. In those hours, Ethan realized that this was more than a simple act of kindness. It was a choice that would shape both their lives. The town outside might never understand, and danger could come from unexpected places. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt that his actions meant something. Saving Kaya was not just about helping another person. It was about standing up for the human instinct to care, to reach out, to connect, even when the world seemed harsh and unforgiving. By dawn, Kaya was resting more comfortably. His breathing had steadied, and he had begun to trust Ethan, though cautiously. Ethan watched him sleep and felt a strange mixture of relief and responsibility. He knew that helping someone like Kaya would not be easy. There would be judgment, there might be conflict, and perhaps even danger. But Ethan also knew that some moments in life required courage, and this was one of them. He whispered quietly to himself, "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but right now you're safe, and I won't leave you." The sun rose slowly, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Ethan and Kaya sat together silently, two strangers from different worlds, brought together by fate, trust, and the quiet strength of compassion. It was the beginning of a bond that neither could have anticipated, a story that would test the limits of bravery, loyalty, and love in ways they had yet to understand. And in that simple, quiet cabin on the edge of the desert, Ethan understood something essential about life. Sometimes, saving someone else can change you in ways you never imagined. The days that followed were not easy, but they were filled with quiet determination. Ethan had always known that helping Kaya was not a small thing. It was a decision that carried weight, responsibility, and the potential for danger. Yet, each day, as he moved around the little cabin, preparing food, fetching water, and tending to Kaya's wounds, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. There was something about caring for another person so completely, without expectation, that stirred a quiet pride inside him. It was the kind of pride that did not demand applause, only the knowledge that he had done what was right. Kaya was slowly regaining strength. His wounds, once raw and painful, were healing under Ethan's careful attention. The stranger moved gingerly at first, testing his legs, flinching when the slightest touch threatened to cause pain. Yet, day by day, he began to regain a sense of stability. Ethan watched him closely, learning the rhythm of his movements, the subtle way he communicated without words. Kaya's eyes, dark and piercing, held a wary intelligence that both fascinated and humbled Ethan. Ethan tried to speak to him in English, but he quickly realized that Kaya understood only fragments. So he began to use gestures, simple words, and a tone that conveyed meaning, even without perfect language. Food became a language of trust. A warm meal placed gently before Kaya was a way of saying, "You are safe here." Water, offered in a steady hand, said the same. Slowly, a connection began to form, fragile but undeniable. The town outside remained cautious, even suspicious. Word had spread quickly that Ethan had taken in an Apache stranger. Some townsfolk whispered warnings, shaking their heads as they passed the cabin. Others were curious, peering through windows or pausing in the streets to exchange hushed comments. Ethan ignored most of it, focusing instead on the man before him. He had learned long ago that true courage was not about pleasing everyone, but about doing what was right, even when it made you unpopular. Kaya, despite his injuries, was not a passive figure. He watched Ethan closely, noticing the care in his movements, the patience in his actions. There was an unspoken understanding growing between them, a silent negotiation of trust. When Ethan applied a poultice to a stubborn wound, Kaya would flinch, but not pull away, learning that Ethan's touch meant healing, not harm. When Ethan handed him food, Kaya's fingers would hesitate over it, then accept it. A small gesture that spoke volumes about the bond forming between them. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Ethan asked Kaya, with gestures and broken words, about his journey. Kaya hesitated, then slowly began to tell bits of his story. Bandits had attacked him while he traveled alone, stealing supplies and leaving him injured. He had been separated from his people, wandering in the harsh desert with no help. Ethan listened without interruption, nodding, making eye contact, and letting Kaya see that his words mattered. The cabin, though small and modest, became a space of safety, where words, actions, and gestures built trust stronger than any language could. Ethan found himself learning from Kaya as much as he was teaching him. He learned about Apache culture, their traditions, and the deep respect they had for the land and its creatures. He learned the value of silence, the power of observing rather than speaking. He learned that true strength often comes in quiet, unassuming ways. And Kaya, in turn, began to see Ethan not just as a helper, but as someone who understood, in his own human way, the vulnerability of being alone and wounded. The bond between them deepened further one evening when danger approached. Ethan had been out collecting firewood when he noticed a group of men approaching the cabin. Their faces were rough and their intentions were clear. They were looking for trouble. Ethan rushed back, heart pounding, and found Kaya standing near the door, tense but ready. Without a word, Ethan moved between Kaya and the strangers, hands raised in a calm, firm gesture meant to warn, not provoke. The men laughed, thinking it would be easy to intimidate them, but Ethan's resolve, his unspoken promise to protect Kaya, made them hesitate. He spoke firmly, telling them to leave, his voice steady despite the fear that churned in his stomach. Kaya watched, eyes wide, as Ethan stood his ground, and when the men finally turned and left, the bond between them deepened in ways words could never capture. It was a moment that said, without saying, "I will protect you, no matter the cost." After that day, Kaya began to trust Ethan more openly. He allowed the young man to assist him more directly with his daily needs, and he even began to speak a few words in English, testing the language with careful precision. Their conversations were slow, filled with gestures and repeated words, yet each exchange strengthened their connection. Ethan felt a growing admiration for Kaya, not just for his resilience, but for the quiet dignity he maintained despite the hardships he had endured. As the days turned into weeks, the cabin became more than a place of healing. It became a home, in its own small, humble way. Ethan and Kaya shared chores, cooked meals together, and even laughed quietly at small shared discoveries. Ethan taught Kaya how to make simple repairs around the cabin, while Kaya taught Ethan how to find herbs and plants that could help soothe pain or aid in healing. Each day brought small victories, quiet moments of triumph that reminded them both that life could still offer kindness, even in a harsh and unpredictable world. But even in this growing trust, boundaries were respected. Kaya often said, with gestures and broken words, that certain touches or actions were not welcome unless they were meant with genuine intent. Ethan understood instinctively. He learned that respect was the foundation of trust, and that love, of any kind, was built on patience, understanding, and the courage to honor another's limits. It was a lesson that would guide him not just in caring for Kaya, but in understanding the deeper connections that define human relationships. One night, as a storm rolled across the desert, bringing thunder and flashes of lightning, Ethan and Kaya huddled inside the cabin. The wind rattled the wooden walls, and the rain hammered against the roof. But inside, there was a quiet warmth. Ethan tended to Kaya, making sure he was comfortable, offering reassurance without words. Kaya, in turn, leaned slightly closer, seeking the comfort of a presence that had become both protective and reassuring. It was a simple act, a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than either could articulate. It was trust, and it was a beginning of something neither had expected. Through all these days, Ethan began to reflect on the choices that had led him here. He thought about the countless towns he had passed through, the people he had ignored, the chances he had taken, and the moments he had held back. Helping Kaya was not just an act of kindness. It was a decision that demanded courage, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to do what was right, even when it was difficult. And in doing so, Ethan realized that he was discovering a new sense of purpose, one that would shape the rest of his life in ways he could not yet imagine. By the time Kaya was able to walk more steadily and perform small tasks on his own, the bond between them had transformed. It was no longer just caretaker and patient. It was a partnership founded on trust, respect, and the quiet recognition that each had something valuable to offer the other. Ethan had shown Kaya the power of human compassion, and Kaya had taught Ethan the depth of resilience and dignity that comes from facing life's hardships with courage. In the evenings, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan and Kaya would sit together outside the cabin. They didn't need many words. Sometimes they simply watched the desert stretch into the horizon, feeling the unspoken connection between them. It was in these quiet moments that Ethan understood something profound, that the human heart, when it chooses compassion over fear, can create bonds stronger than blood, deeper than words, and more enduring than time itself. And so, life settled into a rhythm. Days were filled with healing, learning, and small adventures within the desert's edge. Nights brought reflection, connection, and a shared understanding that they were no longer two strangers but companions bound by circumstance, trust, and the courage to care for one another. Ethan had saved Kaya, yes, but in truth, he would soon discover that the act of saving someone else could transform him as much as it transformed the person he saved. And in that quiet, sun-drenched corner of the Southwest, two lives were beginning a journey neither could have predicted. One that would test their limits, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately teach them the true meaning of trust, loyalty, and the profound power of human connection. Weeks had passed since Kaya's first arrival at the cabin, and with each day, the bond between him and Ethan grew deeper. It was no longer simply a matter of survival or recovery. It had become a quiet companionship, built on shared experiences and unspoken understanding. The desert outside remained harsh and unforgiving, but within the small walls of the cabin, there was a sense of safety, of warmth, and of a connection that neither of them could deny. Ethan had grown accustomed to Kaya's presence. The Apache man's quiet strength impressed him every day. Kaya was resilient in a way that spoke of generations surviving against the odds. Even as he healed, he maintained a dignity that was both humbling and inspiring. He did not complain. He did not ask for favors unnecessarily. Instead, he observed, learned, and gradually contributed to the small tasks around the cabin. Each day, he became more capable of standing on his own, yet his eyes always sought Ethan's reassurance, a silent question. Am I safe? Ethan, in turn, learned more about patience than he ever thought possible. Caring for Kaya required not just tending to wounds or providing food, but understanding boundaries, recognizing discomfort, and giving trust the time it needed to grow. He realized that healing was more than physical. It was emotional, mental, and sometimes spiritual. And it was in these quiet, tender moments that Ethan discovered the profound meaning of compassion. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, Ethan and Kaya ventured beyond the cabin. The desert had become a classroom for them both. Ethan taught Kaya how to identify safe water sources, how to recognize plants that could be eaten or used for healing, and how to navigate the unforgiving terrain. Kaya, in turn, shared knowledge of his own culture. He pointed out subtle signs in the land that Ethan would have missed. Tracks of small animals, the way the wind shifted over a hidden water source, and even methods of predicting the weather by observing clouds and the behavior of birds. Their lessons were mutual, and with each exchange, respect and admiration deepened. Ethan came to value Kaya not merely as someone he had saved, but as a teacher, a companion, and a friend. He realized that true connection often transcends language. They could understand one another without perfect words, relying on gestures, expressions, and the shared rhythm of survival. Each day together wove them closer, threading their lives together in ways both subtle and profound. It was during one of these excursions that danger returned. A band of men, rough-looking and armed, appeared on the horizon. Ethan recognized them immediately from town rumors. Men who preyed on travelers, taking advantage of isolated areas to ambush anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. He froze, calculating the best way to protect Kaya and himself. The desert offered little cover, but they had learned the terrain, and Ethan knew how to use it to their advantage. He grabbed Kaya's arm gently, signaling him to stay close, and whispered instructions as clearly as he could. Kaya followed, instinctively understanding the urgency. They moved silently through the brush, avoiding the open path, hearts pounding with every step. The men passed dangerously close, their laughter cutting through the air like knives. Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it left him breathless. He would not let anyone harm Kaya. Once the danger passed, they returned to the cabin, shaken but unharmed. That night, as they tended the small fire inside, Ethan noticed a subtle change in Kaya. The man no longer seemed entirely cautious. There was a glimmer of trust in his eyes, a recognition that Ethan would not abandon him no matter the threat. And Ethan, too, felt a shift within himself. He realized that protecting someone else could awaken feelings of courage and responsibility he hadn't known he possessed. The following days were quieter, though not without their small challenges. Ethan and Kaya continued their routines, each action reinforcing their bond. They shared meals, worked on repairs to the cabin, and explored the surrounding desert, all the while learning more about each other's habits, preferences, and boundaries. Ethan noticed Kaya's subtle humor, the way he would smile when a small victory was achieved, like catching a rabbit or finding clean water. Kaya began to mimic some of Ethan's phrases in English, testing his pronunciation and laughing quietly when he stumbled. One evening, as they sat under a sky thick with stars, Ethan tried to speak with Kaya about his past. He gestured toward himself, then to Kaya, and slowly began to tell him fragments of his story. He spoke of his family, his struggles, the mistakes he had made, and the loneliness that had driven him to wander. Kaya listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable, but respectful. He did not interrupt or judge. Instead, he offered Ethan the gift of silent understanding, which often says more than words ever could. It was during these quiet nights that Ethan first began to comprehend the phrase that had been whispered in his mind since he met Kaya. "Don't touch me, unless you mean it." It was not merely a warning about physical boundaries, but a lesson in respect, trust, and the seriousness of human connection. Every touch, every gesture of care had to be intentional, filled with sincerity. Ethan understood now that trust could not be rushed, nor could love, whether platonic, protective, or profound, be forced. It had to grow naturally, nurtured by actions and consistency. As their bond deepened, small acts of kindness became powerful symbols. Ethan would offer a hand to steady Kaya when the terrain was difficult, and Kaya would accept it, a silent acknowledgement of trust. They shared meals and firelight, laughing at minor mishaps and celebrating small triumphs. Every gesture, no matter how simple, reinforced the unspoken agreement between them. They were there for each other, fully and without reservation. Then came the moment that truly tested their bond. A sudden fire broke out in the dry brush surrounding their cabin. Flames roared unpredictably, threatening not only their temporary home, but their lives. Ethan acted quickly, grabbing buckets of water and guiding Kaya through the chaos. Kaya, though frightened, followed Ethan's lead, showing remarkable calm and cooperation. Together, they fought the fire, using every skill they had learned and every ounce of strength they possessed. When the fire was finally under control, both men were exhausted, covered in soot and sweat. Yet, in that shared struggle, something remarkable happened. Ethan saw in Kaya not just a survivor, but a partner, someone whose courage matched his own. And Kaya, looking at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and respect, seemed to understand that the young man had become more than a rescuer. He was a protector, a friend, and someone whose presence brought safety and stability to his life. The days following the fire were filled with reflection. They repaired the cabin together, moving carefully but efficiently, aware that they had survived something that could have ended tragically. In quiet moments, they would sit and watch the desert. The flames of the past replaced by a calm that spoke of resilience and mutual trust. Ethan felt a deepening pride, not in his own bravery, but in the way Kaya had faced danger with courage and calm. And Kaya, for his part, seemed to draw strength from Ethan's steadfast presence, learning that vulnerability did not mean weakness, and that trust could indeed be earned through consistent care. As the weeks turned into months, their connection continued to grow. They began to anticipate each other's needs without speaking, completing tasks side by side with a rhythm that spoke of unspoken understanding. Meals were shared in silence, conversations flowed through gestures, expressions, and the occasional word in broken English. Each day strengthened the bond, creating a partnership built on respect, loyalty, and the recognition that they had each other's backs no matter what came their way. Ethan found himself thinking often about the phrase that had guided him since the beginning. "Don't touch me, unless you mean it." He understood now that it was not just about physical touch, but about every action and decision they made together. Every gesture had meaning. Every effort to care, protect, or guide carried responsibility. And through this understanding, he felt a connection deeper than friendship, richer than mere companionship. It was a bond forged through trials, trust, and the quiet, unyielding force of shared humanity. By the time Kaya was able to move freely around the cabin and venture safely into the surrounding desert, both men had transformed in ways they could not fully articulate. Ethan had discovered a strength and patience within himself he had never known, and Kaya had learned that trust and connection could exist even with a stranger from a distant world. Together, they had created a space of safety, learning, and profound understanding, a place where actions spoke louder than words, and where respect and care formed the foundation of a bond that would endure challenges yet to come. And so, life continued in this delicate balance. The desert remained harsh, unpredictable, and sometimes threatening. But inside their small cabin, Ethan and Kaya had found something rare and precious: trust, loyalty, and a connection that would guide them through whatever trials lay ahead. Each day was a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the quiet but unbreakable strength of human bonds forged in adversity. Life around the cabin had grown more predictable, but the quiet peace Ethan and Kaya had found was fragile. The desert could be unforgiving, and the town beyond the hills was slow to accept anything different. Even though Ethan and Kaya had created their own little world of trust and mutual respect, the consequences of their actions began to make themselves known. The first sign came in whispers. As they ventured occasionally into the town to gather supplies, townspeople stared openly. Some offered polite nods, but most avoided them, speaking in hushed tones to one another. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, the subtle disapproval and suspicion directed not at Kaya alone, but at him for daring to help an outsider. Rumors traveled faster than the wind in the desert, and soon people questioned his judgment, his intentions, even his character. It was one evening, after returning from the market with a small bundle of supplies, that Ethan realized just how serious the town's disapproval had become. He was greeted by a few stern faces outside the cabin, their expressions filled with judgment and concern. One man, taller and older than the rest, stepped forward. "You shouldn't be helping him," the man said bluntly, his voice carrying the weight of authority in the town. "He's not one of us. Trouble will follow." Ethan remained calm. He had grown used to such confrontations, but the concern in Kaya's eyes reminded him of the responsibility he carried. "He's hurt," Ethan said simply. "He needed help. That's all." The man shook his head. "It's not just about helping. You're inviting danger to yourself and to him." Ethan knew the man was right in some ways. Their decision to help Kaya had already drawn attention. Bandits had been spotted near the outskirts of town in the past few weeks, and the risk of trouble was real. But he also knew that turning away from someone in need was not an option. He had learned long ago that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Days passed and tension continued to build. Small incidents began to occur. A few townsfolk tried to challenge Ethan when he went out, demanding he stay away from Kaya or cease helping him entirely. Some of the younger boys, fueled by curiosity and prejudice, would throw rocks near the cabin or shout insults from a distance. Each time, Ethan faced these challenges with patience, refusing to escalate the situation while quietly protecting Kaya. Kaya, though growing stronger physically, had yet to fully understand the danger they were now facing. He sensed the unease, the strange looks from people in town, but he did not grasp the depth of the hostility. Ethan spent long evenings explaining, through gestures and careful words, that the world beyond their cabin was not always kind. "We have to be careful," he said, showing Kaya how to move quietly, how to avoid drawing attention, and how to protect themselves without inviting conflict. Despite the external challenges, their bond continued to strengthen. The shared adversity only made them more reliant on one another. They began training together in subtle ways. Ethan teaching Kaya basic self-defense and alertness, and Kaya showing Ethan how to read the land for signs of danger. It was a slow process, but each day brought new lessons, new skills, and a deeper understanding of the trust they had built. The real test, however, came unexpectedly. One morning, as the sun was just beginning to rise and paint the desert in golden hues, a group of men arrived near the cabin. Unlike the bandits they had avoided before, these men were from the town itself, upset by the growing rumor that Ethan was harboring an Apache stranger. They demanded to know why he was helping Kaya, and their tone carried a mixture of anger and fear. Ethan stepped forward calmly, placing himself between the men and Kaya. "He needed help," Ethan said firmly. "I didn't ask for your permission, and I won't stop helping someone in need." The men argued, their voices rising in frustration. "You're putting all of us at risk," one of them shouted. "This is not your world to change." Kaya stepped forward. Hesitantly at first, then more confidently. Though he did not speak the language fluently, his presence was enough to shift the energy. His steady gaze and quiet dignity commanded attention. He did not beg or plead. He simply stood there, showing through his posture and expression that he was not a threat, but a person who had been wronged and now protected by a friend. The confrontation ended without violence, but the message was clear. Their actions had consequences, and the world outside the cabin was not ready to accept them. Ethan realized that helping Kaya had made their lives more complicated, but he also knew that retreating was not an option. Trust, he understood, was a fragile gift, and turning away now would shatter it. In the days that followed, Ethan noticed a subtle change in Kaya. The man's quiet confidence had grown, tempered by the knowledge that the outside world could be harsh and unforgiving. Kaya had always been resilient, but now he understood that his bond with Ethan was not just about recovery. It was about mutual protection and shared survival. He began contributing more actively, fetching water, helping with chores, and even learning how to defend himself in case danger returned. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of the cabin roof, Ethan watched Kaya work with careful precision. He felt a surge of pride, not just for the man's strength, but for the way he had embraced their partnership. "You've grown stronger," Ethan said softly, gesturing with a nod. Kaya's eyes met his, and in that glance was a silent acknowledgement of gratitude, trust, and unspoken loyalty. Their days became a careful balance of routine and vigilance. They continued to gather supplies, maintain the cabin, and explore the surrounding desert, all while remaining alert to potential threats. Each day presented new challenges, but each challenge reinforced the bond they had built. They were no longer two strangers thrown together by chance. They were a team united by circumstance, trust, and shared purpose. But even in their growing strength, they could not ignore the consequences of compassion. The town continued to watch, some with suspicion, others with quiet admiration for their courage. Ethan knew that their actions would not be universally accepted, but he also understood that true kindness often comes at a cost. Helping Kaya had changed not only their lives, but also the way the town saw them, for better or worse. Then came the moment that tested everything they had built. A traveler arrived in the town, wounded and seeking help. He told tales of bandits who had been roaming the desert, attacking anyone traveling alone. The townspeople, already wary of Ethan's actions, grew anxious. They warned him that harboring Kaya had put both their lives at risk and that the danger was far from over. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility. He looked at Kaya, who met his gaze with quiet determination. Together they understood that the choices they had made were not without consequence, but they also knew that retreat was not an option. They had built a bond that could not be undone, a partnership founded on trust, respect, and shared courage. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ethan reflected on the journey so far. He realized that helping Kaya had been more than an act of compassion. It had been a lesson in courage, patience, and the power of human connection. They had faced suspicion, judgment, and danger, yet their bond had only grown stronger. Each challenge had reinforced the unspoken promise they had made to each other, to protect, to care, and to trust, no matter the obstacles. Kaya, for his part, had come to understand the depth of Ethan's commitment. He had learned that true trust is earned through actions, not words, and that love, in all its forms, requires courage, respect, and sincerity. Together they had faced the consequences of their choices, and together they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. As the fire flickered and the desert night stretched around them, Ethan and Kaya knew that their journey was far from over. The world outside the cabin remained unpredictable, and challenges would continue to arise, but they also knew that, whatever came, they would face it together. Their bond had been tested by hardship, strengthened by trust, and solidified by the shared understanding that some connections are worth every risk, every sacrifice, and every consequence. And so, they remained, side by side, two souls brought together by chance, shaped by courage, and bound by the unbreakable power of loyalty, compassion, and the quiet strength of love. Love not defined by tradition, but by action, trust, and the unwavering commitment to stand by one another, no matter what the world demanded. Time in the desert had changed both Ethan and Kaya. They had survived wounds, judgment, and danger, and through it all, they had built a bond stronger than either had anticipated. But the final test of their courage and trust was still to come. The world outside their cabin remained unpredictable, and they both understood that safety was never guaranteed. One morning, as the sun rose with its usual golden intensity, Ethan noticed unusual tracks in the sand. They were fresh, larger than any animal tracks, and leading toward the cabin. His heart sank as he realized that danger was approaching again. He called Kaya over and showed him the tracks. Kaya, now fully recovered and stronger than when Ethan first met him, observed quietly, reading the signs with the skill his people had passed down through generations. Together, they quickly devised a plan, moving supplies and preparing to defend themselves if necessary. Hours later, a group of bandits emerged on the horizon. They had clearly been tracking travelers, and their eyes fell on the cabin with intent. Ethan and Kaya moved silently, positioning themselves so that they could respond if the intruders drew too close. But instead of panicking, they communicated with gestures, a language born of weeks of trust and mutual understanding. Each movement was deliberate, each glance meaningful. They were no longer strangers learning to trust. They were partners ready to face danger together. The bandits advanced cautiously, expecting an easy target. But Ethan and Kaya were prepared. Using the small barriers and natural cover around the cabin, they managed to slow the group's approach. Ethan's heart raced, but he remained calm, focused on protecting Kaya and maintaining control of the situation. He knew that panic would only make things worse. Kaya, silent and steady, mirrored Ethan's movements, ready to act at the right moment. A confrontation became inevitable. One of the bandits stepped forward, attempting to intimidate them. But Kaya, standing tall beside Ethan, met the man's gaze without fear. It was a moment of quiet strength, and the bandits realized that these two were not ordinary targets. Their unity, courage, and preparedness made the intruders hesitate. Ethan seized the moment. He shouted a warning, firm and unwavering, demanding that the bandits leave immediately. The desert echoed with his voice, carrying authority and resolve. Kaya stood beside him, silent but powerful in presence, a living testament to the bond they had forged. Slowly, the bandits retreated. their confidence shaken by the courage and unity displayed before them. They left the cabin and the surrounding land in peace, at least for now. After the danger passed, Ethan and Kaya sat outside, the desert stretching endlessly before them. Sweat and dust covered their faces, but their eyes shone with relief and pride. They had faced a real threat together, and they had prevailed, not through violence alone, but through trust, strategy, and the deep connection between them. It was a defining moment, one that solidified their partnership and underscored the lessons they had learned over the past months. Ethan looked at Kaya, feeling a mix of admiration and gratitude. "We did it," he said quietly. Kaya responded with a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. No words were needed. The bond between them spoke louder than language ever could. They had faced life-threatening danger together and had come through stronger and more united than before. In the days that followed, life returned to a slower rhythm. They repaired the cabin from minor damages caused by the bandits' presence, tended to their supplies, and resumed their daily routines. But something had changed. Their connection was deeper now, unshakable, and their trust in each other absolute. Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey from the day he first found Kaya, wounded and alone, to this moment of triumph and understanding. It had been a path filled with challenges, risks, and learning, but also one rich with loyalty, compassion, and quiet love. Kaya, too, had grown in ways he had not anticipated. He had learned the power of trust, the value of shared strength, and the meaning of a bond that transcended language and culture. He understood now that Ethan's care had been genuine, rooted in a deep respect for his life and dignity. The man who had once been a stranger, and perhaps even a source of suspicion, had become a true companion, someone who had proven time and again that he could be counted on, no matter the circumstances. As the desert nights grew cooler, Ethan and Kaya began to plan for the future. They discussed, through gestures and broken words, the possibility of traveling together, exploring the wider world beyond the cabin, and sharing their unique partnership with others who might need help. They realized that their experiences had transformed them, equipping them with skills, resilience, and a perspective on life that was rare and valuable. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, Ethan looked at Kaya and felt a profound sense of fulfillment. "We've come a long way," he said softly. Kaya's eyes met his, and in that gaze was recognition, gratitude, and an unspoken understanding of everything they had shared. The cabin, once a temporary refuge, had become a symbol of their journey, a place where two lives intertwined in a story of trust, courage, and enduring connection. The lessons they had learned were clear. Life would always carry risks, dangers, and uncertainties. People might judge, misunderstand, or challenge their choices. But true connection, built on compassion, respect, and unwavering support, could withstand those trials. Ethan had saved Kaya, yes, but he had also discovered within himself a depth of courage and empathy that he might never have known without this journey. And Kaya had found in Ethan not just a protector, but a friend, a guide, and a companion whose presence brought stability and hope. In the months that followed, Ethan and Kaya continued their life together in the desert, helping each other, learning from each other, and facing challenges side by side. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments under the vast sky. The desert, once a place of isolation and danger, had become a home not defined by walls or possessions, but by trust, loyalty, and the enduring bond of two people who had chosen to care for each other fully. Their story spread slowly in the town nearby. Some people remained suspicious, but many came to admire the courage and compassion that had brought Ethan and Kaya together. They became a quiet example of the power of trust, showing that even in a world full of judgment and risk, human kindness could prevail. And while their journey was far from conventional, it was rich with meaning, demonstrating that true connections, whether born of necessity, circumstance, or choice, can transform lives in ways both profound and lasting. Ethan often reflected on the phrase that had come to define their journey: "Don't touch me, unless you mean it." He now understood its full meaning, encompassing not just physical gestures, but every act of care, protection, and commitment. Every choice they made, every step they took, carried significance. Every moment of trust, every act of courage, and every decision to stand together reinforced the bond they had built. Kaya, too, understood the weight of their journey. He had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, and that accepting help did not diminish strength. He had discovered that loyalty and trust were gifts, nurtured through patience, understanding, and mutual respect. Together, they had faced danger, judgment, and uncertainty, and together, they had emerged stronger, more resilient, and forever changed. The final days in the cabin were filled with a quiet satisfaction. They had survived challenges that would have broken many others, but they had done so together, learning lessons that would last a lifetime. They had built a bond that could not be undone by distance, danger, or misunderstanding. And as they looked out over the desert, Ethan and Kaya knew that their journey was not just about survival. It was about the transformative power of compassion, trust, and love in its truest, most sincere form. Ethan finally understood that saving Kaya had been only the beginning. The real reward lay in the shared experiences, the trust that had been forged in adversity, and the knowledge that they had found in each other something rare and irreplaceable: a true companion, a friend, and a partner for life's unpredictable journey. And Kaya, in turn, understood that he had not only been rescued, but that he had found someone willing to stand by him, no matter the cost, demonstrating the profound strength of human connection. As the sun set one last time over the horizon, painting the sky with brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Ethan and Kaya sat side by side. Words were unnecessary. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange was the story of their journey, a tale of courage, trust, loyalty, and love. A story that would remain with them forever, shaping their future and proving that the bonds we build through compassion and bravery are the ones that truly endure. In the quiet of the desert night, they knew that life would continue to challenge them. But they also knew that together, they could face anything. Their journey had begun with an act of kindness, had been tested by danger, and had been strengthened by trust. And in the end, it was love. Love in its purest form, born from respect, courage, and unwavering care, that had transformed two strangers into companions for life.